So we are recording now. And then again, like I said, Felipe Martinez with UW Circle. So this is one of the programs that we have as a way to welcome our new international students. This is the population that we probably have in the room. Our international students are starting in summer, but there might be some students that are starting in fall as well. So CIRCLE stands for the Center for International Relations and Cultural Leadership Exchange. And we are one of the two offices that primarily support our international students. So the other office being International Student Services. So as you start getting ready to come to Seattle, you're going to hear from both ISS and us, and some of the things that you need to do to prepare to arrive in Seattle. And one of the things that you need to prepare to arrive in Seattle is find a place to live, right? And then that's probably why you're here. So that's the reason why we have this session. So to give you an idea what we're going to be talking about, we're going to start with introductions. So we have two leasing companies with us, TripleLink and Nolan and Nora. And then we also have someone else from Circle that will be joining us later. So after the introductions, we're going to review some important terms and housing types. So because probably as you start doing your search, you're going to start seeing different terms. You might not necessarily know what it means, but also there's different housing types that you might not be familiar with. So we're going to be briefly talking about them so you have an idea of what it is. Then we're also going to provide some tips, some things for you to consider when looking for off-campus housing. And this is primarily what we're going to be talking about, off-campus housing. And last but not least, we're going to provide some university resources as well. And this is why I want to make sure you have the recording, because the links are going to be embedded in the presentation. And then after that, we're going to go into breakout rooms, which you'll be able to ask any questions that you may have, either of the two companies that we have or from the Circle staff. So with that, Jessica, can I ask you to quickly introduce yourself?
Yes, of course. Hi, everyone. My name is Jessica, and I'm from TripleLink. So TripleLink is a property management company in Seattle. Let me quickly send out our website link to this group chat so you guys can take a look at our website later and also find out what we have. So for TripleLink, we are a property management company, and we do manage around 20 apartment buildings near the University of Washington. And our total portfolio in Seattle is 30 apartment buildings, but we do have majority of our portfolio near the University of Washington. And I personally also graduated from the University of Washington. So I'm also an international student. So I understand what is the pain point for each individual international student when you guys are looking for housing. By the time I came to Seattle, I don't really know that there are off-campus housing options available for international students, because we do not want to purchase furniture, and we also want some affordable units as well. So at TripleLink Seattle, we provide apartment buildings ranging from $800 to $2,000 per person, and you do have a variety of options for studio apartments, 1 bedroom and 2 bedrooms. But majority of the floor plans that we have are studio apartments, because right now, like, when you guys have go through COVID, that we really values personal space, and our majority of our portfolio that you will be stay by yourself with an individual unit with your own kitchen or shared kitchen and some living situations. But majority of our apartments will be having a private bedroom and a kitchen for yourself, so all included into one setting. And also we have furnished option and spas with unfurnished options as well. So no matter what price point you are looking for, I really encourage you guys to go to our website, take a look of what we have, and leave us an inquiry of your name, email address, and our leasing agent will be able to reach out to you guys after this meeting. And we do offer 1-year lease. And if you do have specific terms that you are looking for example, if your program is only 6 months or 7 months, perhaps, feel free to bring this up with our leasing agent. We normally only provide 1-year leasing options, but if you do let us know what is your situation, we can see if there's anything we can do for you. But in general, no matter when the lease term will start, it will just be a 1-year lease term.
Awesome. Thank you, Jessica. And Naria?
Yeah, so my name is Naraya. I am the leasing manager with Nolan and Nora Apartments. Again, we are a off-campus student housing complex. So we have Nolan and we have Nora. So they are two separate buildings. I'm going to go ahead and drop those websites there so that you guys can go ahead and look at the floor plans that we have. So Nora is going to be our primarily studios, micro studios that will range from 297 square feet to 355 square feet, and they will also be fully furnished. So that is one really nice thing, especially coming from anywhere but Seattle. You won't have to worry about buying any furniture, bringing any furniture, everything's there, and there is no additional charges with those. It's just going to be your base monthly rent. And then we do have our leases, including for all of them, Wi-Fi and trash. And then at Nolan, we will have our 2 bedrooms, 4 bedrooms, and 5 bedrooms for those who are looking at bigger floor plans or just wanting bigger spaces. We do also offer for those who may not have any roommates in mind, but do want to, be more cost, sensitive, that usually the bigger the floor plan, the cheaper the rent will be. And you will see that throughout off-campus housing in Seattle. So one really nice thing that we offer is roommate matching. So you can always pick these bigger floor plans and just put down your preferences with the application when you go to sleep, when you wake up, what your study habits are, what year you are in school, and then we can help that way to match you. We did also just roll out new leases who signed will get an invite from RoomSync, which is an app that's honestly the best way to put it, kind of like a dating app where you are swiping through potential roommates and you will be able to match with them in that sense and let us know. That point you can contact them, you guys would match that way. So there is different options between both Nolan and Nora, but kind of what Jessica had said, this is pretty standard for a lot of university or I guess tailored towards student housing because we aren't affiliated with the university. They will be primarily year-long leases. And then we do offer lease takeovers. If you do need to get your lease taken out, like move out early, you can always have the option just finding someone and then you would get out of your lease that way. But yeah, I'm definitely excited to hear from you guys and see, answer any questions you may have. I know that they don't really give you way too many options and too many, resources for off-campus student housing. So it's definitely great that you guys are all here and learning that this is an option for you, even though you are an international student.
Thank you, Naria. So you see, both Jessica and Naria already talked about different options that you might have. So that's why it's good that we have the recording and the website, because you're going to be able to take this information to be able to figure out what best suits your needs, right? So like Naria mentioned, roommate matching if you want to live with roommates, or like Jessica mentioned, if it's important to you to live by yourself. So before we go into that, let's just talk about really quickly about Seattle. So the map that you have in front of you are the neighborhoods that are closest to the University of Washington. So the area where you see downtown is essentially north of downtown. And then don't think that this is North Seattle. This is just the neighborhoods that are closest to the university being the University District. But one of the things to point out, when I moved to Seattle for the first time, for example, someone said that each neighborhood has its different feel. And it's true, right? So depending on the type of community that you want to live in, it could be, something if it's more residential, if you want it to be a little more quiet, for example, or if you want something where there's a lot of apartment buildings because you want to be surrounded by people. And typically when there's a lot of apartment buildings, it tends to be more restaurants or things to do, right? So that's something to keep in mind. The other thing to keep in mind is that Seattle has very good public transportation system. So as you're thinking about your place that you want to live, check out the different public transportation options, because more than likely there's going to be a bus that will take you, or a light rail, the train that we use, that will take you from where you are living to the university. So something to keep in mind. And like I mentioned before, you're going to get the recording of this after we end. So now to talk about some important terms. So for example, you have heard the term off-campus housing. So typically in the US, when we think about off-campus housing, it means privately owned housing, meaning that it's not owned by the University of Washington. Now, the reason why it's important to call that out is because the university has some apartment buildings or some high rises that are not on campus, but just maybe across the street or maybe a couple blocks away. So even though technically it's not on the campus itself, that is considered on-campus housing. So that's why off-campus housing typically means privately owned, not by the university. The other thing that you might want to know, may have noticed as you have your search, is that there's the word the lease or the rental agreement. And those terms are usually used interchangeably, meaning they can mean the same. So that means is that the lease or your rental agreement is a legally binding document. So it's very important that you read it to make sure that you understand all of the terms that you're agreeing to, because essentially you're agreeing into a contract in exchange for the money that you're paying, you're living in that place. So sometimes students make the mistake that they don't read the rental agreement, and then there might be some issues when, for example, like Naria mentioned, that you want to break your lease. It might not necessarily be an easy with a lot of different companies, so it's very important to read that, because like I said before, it's legally binding. So unless you, even though you're not necessarily living there, because you signed the lease, you will be required to pay that rent with some companies. The other thing to ask is about the security deposit. So what that means is essentially that whoever you rent from, they're going to ask you for additional money as a security in case that there's any damages to the building, to the property, or things that they might need to pay after you move out. So it's security deposit, and the stipulations for that are outlined in the rental agreement. So it's make sure that important that you read that. Something that happens in the US also, it's whenever you want to rent a property, there's usually a credit check. But the challenge that you have as international students is that you probably don't have established credit in the US if you haven't lived here before. So when you see that, it's important to let your potential manager or landlord or leasing company know that you're new to the US. So they'll be able to tell you what are some of the things that they could do to work with you, since they won't be able to do the credit check. The other term to know is landlord or management company. So technically what the landlord means is whoever owns or manages the property that you're leasing from. So it could be if you're renting from someone that owns the property, for example, that property owner will be your landlord. Or in the cases of, Naria and Jessica, they work for a leasing company. So the leasing company is the entity that manages the companies. Utilities, that typically means things that you need to make sure that you're comfortable in your living environment. So for example, gas, electricity, air conditioning, those are typically utilities that either are included or not included in the rent. So that will be outlined in the lease when you sign. And lastly, amenities. So typically amenities means something that is a perk, for lack of a better word, that sometimes comes with the properties. So for example, having a gym, if you are in an apartment complex, if there's a pool, if there's a storage locker, or some of the properties in Seattle, for example, have rooftop decks that are really nice, have really nice views. Well, those are considered amenities, right? So it's in addition, those are things that you could take advantage of as part of your rent. Something to keep in mind, though, is that sometimes when an apartment has a lot of amenities, sometimes that means that the rent is going to be a little more expensive. So for example, if it's not important to you to have a gym in your apartment building, for example, that could give you an idea of the different price ranges that you should be looking into when looking for a place to stay. Next, we're going to go into the different housing types, and this is just kind of like to give you an idea. So a studio, a bachelor, or an efficiency, sometimes they need the same. So essentially it's kind of like a big room that has a separate kitchen and a separate bathroom. but there's no walls between the living room and the living room. So for someone that wants to live by themselves and save some money, for example, a studio apartment will be a very good alternative. An apartment, or in other parts of the world, is known as a flat. It's essentially an apartment or a space where 1, 2, 3, 4 people live, right? Depending on the number of bedrooms and number of bathrooms that are in the apartment complex. Another word that you might see in your search is condominium. And the easiest way to describe the difference between an apartment and a condominium is that the apartment is part of an entire complex that is managed by someone, so either a single owner or a leasing company in this case, whereas the condominium, you're renting directly from the owner of that unit. So sometimes different apartments have different owners, and then you'll be renting from that person. So that's basically will be the only difference. The other thing about it that you'll see is an in-law or a duplex. So that's essentially a different unit that's attached to a house. So for example, one of the places that I rented in Seattle, the second year that I lived in Seattle, was a basement unit. So the owner of the property lived in the upper level, and I lived in the basement unit. So essentially that was considered an in-law unit. So something to consider as well. A townhome, which is what you see a picture there. It could be a multi-level unit that has 2, 3 bedrooms, but the mixed townhomes unique is that usually they have shared walls. So there might be multiple units that have a shared wall, but there's, you have the apartment to yourself or the people that you share it with. And lastly, single family homes. So for example, if you're coming in with your family, or if you want to have a large pet, for example, or if you want to have a bigger space to live, single family homes would be something to consider. But at the same time, they tend to be more expensive because there's more maintenance and more space that comes with that. Now, some things to consider as you're thinking about your housing search. What is my price range? So one of the things that we advise students is to not think about how much you're willing to pay as the max, but rather what is the range. And the reason for that is because the range will give you some flexibility. So for example, if you're willing to live by yourself, it will be potentially your max. But if you're willing to have roommates, then it could potentially be in the lower end, like it was mentioned earlier, right? Because you share the cost of that space. So if you think of it as a range, it gives you an opportunity to think about, oh, do I want to live by myself? Do I want to live with roommates? Or how far from campus do I want to live in? The other question you should be asking yourself is, what neighborhood do I want to live in? Like I mentioned before, do you want to live in a more quiet residential neighborhood, or you want to live in something that has more of an active nightlife, for example, like Capitol Hill or the U District, for example? The other question that you might want to ask yourself is, how far am I willing to live from campus? Now, the reason why this is important is because typically the closer you live to campus, the more expensive things tend to be, right? But also the closer you live to campus, the more flexibility you have to come home for lunch, for example, or if you have a late class, you'll be able to walk home as opposed to getting on public transportation. So there's a trade-off, right? Living closer to campus to have the convenience could potentially mean more in rent. Whereas if you live close to a little further away, it could be cheaper, but you have to wake up earlier to go to class. Or if you have an evening class, you have to get on the bus or the train to be able to get to home. Do I want to live with roommates? That's something to consider, especially for folks that have never necessarily shared a room or a space with people that may not necessarily know. That's something to think about. And then we're going to send you, as part of the recording, some additional questions that you need to ask yourself if you want to be with roommates. Do I want a full kitchen? Something that is very simple to think about, but something that we might not necessarily know. So for example, in my younger days, when I was living when I was in college, I didn't necessarily cook a lot. So having a full kitchen might not necessarily be what I wanted. So, but now as I'm older, I cook more. So having a full kitchen is important to me. The same thing with parking. You know, do you want to have access to parking if you're bringing a car, or if you don't have a car, that's something to consider. And or an example of an amenity is like, do I want an in-unit laundry? Now, as that I'm older, that's something, one of my non-negotiables, as we say it. Any place that I live in has to have a washer and dryer in the building. So, but with that said, that could potentially be more expensive, but that's something that's really important to me. So just example questions that you need to ask yourself. And lastly, before we turn it over for you to ask your questions, there's some resources that we want to make sure we highlight. So the University of Washington offers a free service called the Night Shuttle. So essentially what it is a bus that takes you from different points around the university and takes students to the library, for example, or back to the residence halls. You don't have to live in the residence halls to be part of that, to be able to get on that bus. But the reason why we're highlighting that, it's because if you remember, I mentioned before, the university owns apartments or buildings that are off campus. So if the building that you choose is within the route of the Night Shuttle, you could easily get on that bus and get home, right? The other service that we provide is the Husky Night Walk, and that is sponsored by the University Police Department. And essentially what it is an opportunity for you to call and say, hey, you know, can I have someone walk me home? I'm studying late at the library and I want to be walked home. This is a free service again. And this is something that there's a particular perimeter where you'll be able to be walked to. And the link, when you click on it, you'll be able to see how far the service will be able to take you. Something as a reminder, the UPass, this is something that it's part of your university fees. You pay for it, but it's unlimited fare to where you want to go. The reason why I'm saying that is because as you're thinking about your search, like I mentioned before, if you want to be for a little further out because you are you want to save a little money, remember your UPass will be able to take you from home to the university. And lastly, a department on campus is student legal services. If you remember, I told you your leasing agreement is a legal document. So if there's ever, hopefully this doesn't happen, but in the event that there could potentially be a misunderstanding or potentially there could be a conflict between you and the landlord, you could turn to student legal services for help because it's essentially a free service that's offered to students as part of your university fees. This is something that not a lot of students know about, but this is something that we wanted to make sure we highlighted in case you had any questions. Okay. And before we go into the breakout rooms, so this is going to be the end for me. Harim and myself, we're going to be answering general questions about living in Seattle. Whereas Naria and Jessica, they're going to be able to answer questions specifically about the leasing opportunities that they have available to you. So you'll have an opportunity to go in between rooms. So Harim is going to have a breakout room and I'll stay in the main room. And Jessica and Naria are going to have their own individual breakout room. But before I let you go, for you to ask your questions, I want to plug this in. So if you're a new student arriving in summer, we have a number of welcome programs for you. So make sure you scan the QR code so you'll be able to see all the different things that we have. So when we meet you in June. So I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to pause the recording.